You've come to the right spot. It's another edition of Lewis at Large. 60 minutes of smart talk radio is in your future, with guests from all walks of life and all points of view. And now, with this week's edition of Lewis at Large, here's your host, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to another segment of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis, of course, from the flight deck here, and of course that means some smart talk radio is in your future. This segment, a really interesting one indeed. We're going to be talking to Don Hussey. Who is Don Hussey? Well, he served in the United States Air Force as a member of the security service from 1960 to 64. He spent a year-long tour of duty on the St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Strait, believe it or not. Also earned 2 advanced degrees, taught school in public and private as a businessman. More recently entered the race for the U.S. Congress in Massachusetts. Ticket to Ride, the promise of America, a true story, is a unique story, an inspiring story of courage and determination. That is a vague background, but vagaries sometimes serve us well. Don, how are you, my friend?
Oh, good morning, Warner. Very nice to speak with you.
Well, let's do this. Let's give a little bit more of a specific setup for our Lewis at Large listeners. Tell us a little bit more about your background and the inspiration to put together this work called Ticket to Ride.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say hello to the men and women serving on Fort Riley in Kansas. I spent a couple of days. Both before and after my son went on his second tour to Iraq. I walked over the Buffalo Soldiers Bridge and down into the field to find his car. Spent 5 days in Manhattan. I actually was going to write a memoir, 5 days in Manhattan. Nobody would have figured that out until the end. So, I spent a good deal of time in Fort Riley, and before that, Fort Hood and Fort Sill and Fort Benning and all of that, chasing my son around as he went from one military installation to another. The impetus for the book, if you don't mind, I can just kind of paraphrase from the opening prologue. This memoir began as a letter to my son Gregory, dated September 9th, 2006, a few weeks before his deployment to Iraq as a field artillery officer with the United States Army. My letter was an attempt to detail for him my life as a young boy growing up on the South Shore in Massachusetts, time and events he knew little about or could never have imagined. I had realized all along that if this day ever came, I might never see my son again, so I figured it was time to answer the many questions he must have had for me throughout our time together, but had never asked. I wrote what I could given the constraints of time and handed it to him as he exited the briefing room with his M16, his armored vest, and his loving heart. And on December 3rd at 0600, I watched as my son's flight, heavy with weapons and soldiers, lumbered down the runway at Fort Hood, Texas, lifting off into the early morning haze, bound for Iraq. So that's how all of that began. When he got his orders to go to Iraq, I figured I think it'd be a good time to tell him all about my life, the stuff I've never told him before. So That's how it all began. And when he took off, this was out of Fort Riley was the second tour. He had already done the Fort Hood, the first tour. So he spent two tours in Iraq, and then it was a little later on when he got his orders to go to Afghanistan. And I was in the middle of a congressional race at that point. So he had a wife and 2 kids back here, and he's fighting the war in the mountains and the hills of Kandahar, and I'm shaking hands with the folks down in Cape Cod.
Yeah.
And he's got a wife and 2 kids here. I said, I just have to withdraw from the race and spend more time at home. God knows what the future holds.
Your life has been filled with challenge. It's been filled with opportunity and choices, and that was one of them. What a poignant moment indeed. Don, let's dive here into Ticket to Ride. Give us the background. Give us the general overview.
Well, I was a kid that moved from town to town, 11 different moves when I was a kid, all along the South Shore in Massachusetts. There was never enough money to pay the rent, so we were kicked out from one place or another. My early childhood education was fractured at best, and my desire when I got a little older was that I figured out it was time to time to move on. So I told my mother, I said, I'm out of here. So in the middle of actually the first couple of months of November, just before Thanksgiving, I walked out of Marshfield High School, which is on the South Shore, and told the principal, I said, I'm leaving. Sorry, I just can't deal with this or home life or anything else. So then I went on to get myself a job, and then I got another job, and then I joined the Air Force. And after taking care of my mother and my brother for a few months, I was sent off to Lackland Field in Texas and began my career, or at least my 4-year tour in the Air Force. And it changed my life. I can say to the young folks that may or may not be listening to this that my time in the military pretty much saved my life. I really had no place else to go, and I was going to make it happen, and they weren't going to deny me. I was young, I was naive, and I was the youngest guy in my outfit, and I didn't think I was going to get through basic training, but they threatened me enough to convince me that either I do what they tell me to do, or they're going to be sending me back. I said, you can send me back, but I'm not quitting. I said, I really got no place else to go. I'll do what you want to do. So from that point forward, my military experience really was a very dramatic change in the direction my life was taking, earlier.
Don, what the book talks very, very specifically about your life, but it speaks to a greater story, of course, and that's the story again of the opportunity, and not necessarily the entitlements, but the opportunity that is here in America. Does it not?
It does, and in the latter part of the book, in the afterword, I have some philosophical sort of musings that I put in there, which I can articulate in a moment. But the whole notion of opportunity in America is nothing more than that. It's an opportunity, no guarantees, no handouts. You either make it happen or it doesn't happen. You lose your direction, you lose your control, you lose your focus and your compass. So you have to stay focused on what it is your goals are, what your values are, your morals are, and what it is you want to do with your life. You only get one life. That's all you get. So I figured out early on that I either made something of my life or I didn't, and it was all up to me. There was no back door, as they say. So in the back of the book, I do talk about some things that I think are pretty important and pretty relevant even in today's world. From the book, never forget that much of the hard work has already been done for us. The fertile soil of freedom has been nurtured by generations of Americans willing to sacrifice everything. From Bunker Hill to Omaha Beach to Vietnam and beyond, the broken hearts, the spilled blood, and the endless tears, the price paid in full. If you're willing to work and work and work some more, you will put that hard-fought, God-given freedom to good use. And as you gain confidence, set your sights on the impossible, and then watch with a smile as your dreams race across the endless wonders of a midnight sky. Success in life is not necessarily about winning or losing. It's the journey and the many wonderful people you meet along the way. It's the desire to achieve something greater than personal ambition, an attempt to make a difference, to leave the world a better place because you dared, you tried, and you set an example. Several years ago, I broke open a fortune cookie and read the message tucked inside. Life is an exciting adventure or it's nothing at all. So I folded it up and tucked it in my wallet in case I ever needed reminding. So all of the work that's gone before us from Washington on through is inspirational to me. I've been to the beaches in Normandy. I've been to the Arizona Memorial in Hawaii. I've walked the Freedom Trail in Boston. I know something about Henry Knox and the Ticonderoga and the guns on the hills up in Boston, forcing the British fleet from the harbor. I've read American history quite thoroughly, and when the 225 Rangers scaled the cliffs at Point du Hoc on Omaha Beach, silencing the guns that were up there, only 9 of them made it to the top, but the Germans ran like hell when they got up to the top, and And these are the guys that have set the table for all of us. And to dishonor them in any way, shape, or form by not reaching for the brass ring, for not getting out there and doing something with your life, is insulting. So I was full of that when I was a kid. I'm still full of it today. And I realized that when you're given an opportunity and you're born free, you go for it. You take it as far as you can take it. And of course, I took it into a congressional race, which I at the time was doing very well. We were leading the pack, as they said, and I turned around and I said, I can't do this anymore. So that's what that is. And I began, continuing with the book, and the book finally got published in 6 years later, and my son made it back from Afghanistan. Not the same guy that he went over there, I can assure you of that. Tough time for him, very, very difficult. He made reference to the dark places in his mind, having seen what he had seen over there. So I have the greatest respect for him and all of those that serve in the military.
Indeed. Again, if you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis, from the flight deck of Lewis at Large. We're talking to Don Hussey, a really poignant, fascinating work called Ticket to Ride, The Promise of America, a true story. Don has been sharing with us particularly examples from the military and gratitude, not only for the opportunities he had, but also those that came before. Don, while in the military, some significant events happened to you there.
Yes. As young as I was, I had been to Keesler Air Force Base and was schooled in communications, specifically Morse code. So I learned Morse code and was subsequently graduated from there and sent to a remote island off the coast of Nome in the Bering Straits, just a few miles from the Soviet Union, which was the Soviet Union in those days. And we had several incidents up there because we were so close. And one of them was an incident where we had sent a transport down the coast of the Soviet Union, checking to see what kind of response and what their response times were. And they didn't hesitate. They sent three MiG 17s right out of Vladivostok to approach and to encourage our transport to get out of their airspace. I was the kid in the operations room. They brought me out to the command center, and I sat there and I copied the Morse code of all of the transmissions that were going back and forth between Vladivostok and their pilots. And I can tell you that it was nearly impossible to stay up with, but I did. And I got a little handshake and a congratulations from the commander, and nothing really happened. Our flight was called off. Radio silence was broken, and they landed in a straight-in approach just beyond the Aleutians. So that was a pretty dramatic and exciting sort of event. And then from there, believe it or not, I was sent down to Florida and was involved to some extent with the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62. And of course, during those times, the Kennedy brothers were assassinated, and Martin Luther King was assassinated. 1968 was a terribly, terribly bitter time in the country. And I was in the service for a good part of that leading up to it, and then after that, I went off to college.
What again? So many people come away with life lessons from the military. They mature, and their view of the world expands, and their recognition probably of their own potential expands. That must have been very enlightening for you.
Well, it sure was. I had seen guys drop out of basic training for reasons that I just couldn't figure out. It's hard. There's no doubt about it. They make it hard. They teach you discipline, and they teach you esprit de corps. They teach you something about military history. They school you. They pay you. They feed you. They give you medical care and clothing. There's quite a scene in my book about the clothing. There's a lot of scenes in the book if you've read it. It speaks to just how young and naive I was. But I knew that, it's just like in that movie, An Officer and a Gentleman. He's up on the upper deck of that building, and the sergeant is tormenting him with the hose, and he breaks down and he says, I got no place else to go. That was me. I had no place else to go. I was not going back to where I had come from. I had left. I had escaped the torment of an abusive stepfather and a going nowhere life, and decided that I was just a kid, but I knew what I wanted, and I went after it, and I made it what I did. And when I got back from the service, there were no jobs, and so somebody says, "Why don't you go collect? You can collect because you're entitled to that." So I went to the unemployment office and I went through the line. It was a cold, miserable, rainy, snowy day. Nobody wanted to be in that building, but the place was packed with people trying to collect. I gathered up my papers after the third line, took them outside, threw them in the trash barrel, and said, "The hell with this! I'm not collecting anything. I'm going to find a job," and I did. So I worked at a car wash for 3 months, and then I worked in a restaurant for another 7 months. And by the time I was done, I had saved enough money. Hopped in my old car and drove out to Southern Illinois University and began my college career.
Well, as you, with all this as background, I'm just curious, again, you referenced your son. How did it change you, do you think, as a husband and as a father?
Anyone who has a son or a daughter or a family member in the military, whether they've served overseas or not, especially if they have, it is such a nightmare. They've got this rule that if your son has been injured or badly broken down or whatever in the war zone, they're forbidden to knock on your door after 10 o'clock. So comes 10 o'clock at night, you can go to bed. Next day, it's the same thing, and it goes on. And he was in 2 tours back to back, 2 years in Iraq, and then that year in Afghanistan, where he was a commanding officer in the hills of Kandahar for that full year. So any parent, any cousin, any brother, any sister that has relatives in the military, my hat's off to them, because I know firsthand just how difficult that is to go through that, and especially, he had a wife and 2 kids here, and so everybody was trying to put the good face on it, but it was a long and difficult time for us back here, and I can only imagine how difficult it was, over there. So it's tough, and that's what you deal with, I guess.
Don, what? And again, we don't really. Not here to shed a bunch of criticism or an indictment, but just from what you see as you survey sort of the American landscape, what maybe from your story and from where you sit, where are we missing it, either in public education or, let's just put it this way, just Americans' attitude towards their own opportunities that are here and their Americans' attitude towards their own situation?
I could really get into that. What's going on in America today is nothing more than disgraceful. We have a dropout rate in America, in most of the major cities in America, 50% or greater. I make reference to the Robert F. Kennedy Memorial High School in Los Angeles, where Robert Kennedy was assassinated on June 5th, 1968. It's the Taj Mahal of all public schools in America. That school cost $587 million to build. It has everything from swimming pools to computer labs. It also has a 50% dropout rate. So it isn't the money that's driving the educational machine, and the more money they pump into it, the less they get in terms of a return. At least that's how I view it. It's the intrinsic nature to achieve. It's your desire, it's your motivation, it's your willingness to sacrifice. And if you don't grab a hold of it, especially when you're young, it won't be long before you'll be 30 and you begin to lose it. And then, of course, when you get to be 40, you have lost it. So, and that's happening across America. You see these young kids now that are dropping out of school, either high school or college, and what are they doing? Are they out finding work? Many of them are trying, I'm sure. There's a great majority of them that are lost, and they get involved with things that you and I both know are destructive to the country. I'd like to see some changes in education reform, but we seem to be talking about that for the last 30 or 40 years. It has to come from within. It has to be promoted and generated from the family. The family has to stay together. Kids need a father and a mother, and they need some direction, some discipline. Otherwise, they run wild in the streets. And what we've got now is a murder rate that is just not even fathomable. So, yeah, I encourage folks. When I speak to kids, I say, listen, make sure if at all possible, stay in school. It's your only ticket, to get onto a decent life. You have to have an education. You have to have some credentials. You have to be able to knock on the door and say, listen, here's my paperwork. What can we do together? The problem, of course, is that we do not have an administration that is supporting and promoting jobs. It's as simple as that. It's for whatever the reason, and I don't want to get into it because I'll get myself into trouble, but there is no clear program. There's no agenda to drive the business environment in this country to produce jobs, to help these young people find work, and to find their way in America.
Well, the work is inspirational. It is a very, very candid and poignant look into a life. Our guest has been Don Hussey. The work is Ticket to Ride, The Promise of America, a true story indeed. It's published by Seawall. And speaking of Seawall, Don, where are you back on? You said you mentioned Cape Cod. Are you that where you live?
I actually live in a town south of Boston called Hingham. But the congressional district that I was involved with was the 10th congressional district, and that ran from essentially Quincy down the coast, Massachusetts coast, down to the Cape and the Islands. It was a large district. It's now been changed. It's now the 9th congressional district. We've lost a congressional district here, but it's a huge. It's a huge string of towns that touch one another from just south of Boston all the way down to the Cape and the Islands.
So while you were campaigning, you had plenty of fried clams along the way, I'm sure.
As a matter of fact, I did, and
Nothing
last
better.
year I had the privilege of attending the first annual Nantucket Book Festival on the island, and I had just a terrific time. And I tend to think that some of my roots come from there, but I'm not real sure. I haven't been able to trace that back. But yeah, a lot of fried clams.
I've been fortunate enough to spend a fair amount of time on the Cape, and what a glorious spot it is indeed. But anyway, back to Ticket to Ride. Don, how can people find out more about your story and also pick up a copy of the book?
They can go on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. They can also go to my personal website, which is www.donhussey.com, DONHUSSEY.com. They can order it through PayPal, or they can go to the brick and mortar stores of Barnes & Noble and buy them there, or they can go online and buy it on Amazon.com. You know, the thing that I mention when I speak to people is that if you'd like a signed copy of the book, just go to my personal website. I'll get the notification through PayPal, and I sign all of those, and those all go out the very same day, so you won't have to wait for it either. It's an inspirational. Without patting myself on the back, I can tell you, it's an inspirational nonfiction, which, if placed in the hands of young people, especially those who are entering college or trying to find their way through high school, reading this book will give you enough reason, I think, to continue on regardless of the difficulties, whether it be personal or educational. Get through a course, get through a program, get through a personal relationship that may or may not be going well, get through the hard knocks of not having enough money, having a car that doesn't work, but making sure that, like a horse going down the street, you've got the blinders on and you're focused directly ahead. You have an objective, and you're going to meet that objective. As the book points out, I had a tough experience during a summer job where I was injured in a steel mill. I won't go through it. It's graphically portrayed in the book, but that set me back, but did not deter me from the objective that I had. And the reason I mentioned that, it was during my freshman and sophomore summer vacation that this happened. So I had 3 more years to not only get over the difficulties of the accident, but to continue on with school, and that's what I did. And I haven't regretted it. I knew it would be difficult, and I got that degree. I got my leather-bound document, and then I knew if I had that in my hand, I could kick open doors, and I could make my way in this great country and become a success. To whatever extent you view success. And I've had some successes, and there's been some triumphs, and there's been some difficulties. But hey, it's the guys and the gals that came before us that gave me the inspiration. I mean, they didn't give up. They formed this country. They made it the safe and great free country that it is today. You have to pay tribute to them, and you have to stand up and you have to say, listen, I'm going to do this not only for my family and my country, but for myself. I have to find my way in life, and I have to become a success. And that's what I'm going to do, and that's, of course, what I did.
Well, we appreciate your time. Best of luck to you, and we will see you down the road for sure.
Hey, Warren, this has been a great pleasure. Thanks very much, and maybe at some point I'll get a chance to go out and visit Lawrence, Kansas, and go to the University of Kansas. I spent some time with Bob Dole when I was in Washington, and what a great man he is. And of course, I know his story, and I know he's an alma mater from the University of Kansas. And hey, listen, great talking with you, and I do appreciate the opportunity. Take care of yourself. Thanks for the interview.
You bet. We will be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.